Our inflation crisis is getting worse. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the consumer price index rose to 8.6% compared to this time last year. Not only that, this is the highest rate increase in 13 months, a 1% increase from last month, and also holds the honor of breaking a 40-year record. And if you don't want to sweat, look away from your screen, because on your screen now are the largest year-over-year increases. These are kind of like the top ones, okay? And that includes fuel oil. Now, what's that? That, for instance, is what powers buildings. That is what powers electrical stations that are sending the electricity to you. That's why that affects you directly. You just don't know it. Up 106%. That number is the highest on the index since they started carrying it back in 1935. All right, energy commodities increased over 50%, motor fuel and gasoline up 49 and 48% respectively, and airline fares 37%. Maybe they should forget about dropping the masks on the planes, and they should drop the prices on the flights. Here to check in with us on this is Chris Markowski, host of the Watchdog on Wall Street, the radio show. The market didn't react well to these numbers early on this morning, Chris. Looks like the market's going to be down. I don't know if we have it. It's down over 600. It was down over 800 at one point. But how do you read what's going on? Because I think the administration, a lot of people thought we were going to see better numbers. We didn't see them.
There's a lot of people predicting that there was going to be better numbers, and I don't even know how they could actually think that. Again, this is rear view. It's May. But prices were consistently going up with energy. They were consistently going up with food. We're now starting to see some sort of moderation in things like clothes and cars and some other things. So maybe June's numbers, which will come out in July, obviously, will be much, much better. But, the most important thing when it comes to inflation, and there was that sportscaster that had that thing that let's go to the videotape. You and I were talking about this last year. The concept that this was transitory is patently absurd. When you have energy prices continue to rise, when you have food prices, these are things that people buy all the time. And this is why today you had the consumer confidence number come out, and it was one of its lowest numbers that they've had. It went from 58 to a little over 50. It's like getting punched in the gut by Mike Tyson every single time you go to the pump and every single time you go to the grocery store. Despite the fact that unemployment is low and there's some good things in regards to the economy, when people are constantly getting hit by this, it's very hard.
It is. And let's go back, because you and I, Chris, have been talking about this for actually a couple years. They started spending money we didn't have. And even if you could argue, as Greta Van Susteren did last segment or two, at a certain point you had to spend some money to keep the economy going when we had that trough, when the pandemic hit and everything came to a halt. But then they kept spending money in Congress, and then the Fed kept buying debt. To make a long story short, they have put so much money into this economy, and people like you have been warning us about that, and here it is.
At $1.9 trillion is just extraordinary with this American Recovery Act there that he put forward. It made no sense whatsoever. It's almost as if the people in Washington, D.C., they don't travel anywhere. It's like they never go to Texas. They never go to Florida. They never go to these states that never really shut down to that great of a degree, where there was a lot of economic activity going on. It wasn't just Washington, D.C. and New York and L.A. and San Francisco and some of these other places. And they didn't pay attention to that. And even had Larry Summers, again, he was a Treasury Secretary, Democrat, coming out and saying, what are you guys doing here? You're printing way too much money. This is going to hit, and it's hit us now.
Yeah, and Janet Yellen finally admitted that that was the case. But I felt like she kind of sold her soul when she was a Fed chief. She knew how to keep track of money, but then she became Treasury Secretary, and it's like, yeah, spend it like we have it. And that's part of the point also. We don't have it. Okay, let me take a quick look at this. Meat up 14%, non-alcoholic drinks 12%, dairy almost 12%, cereals almost 12%, fruits and vegetables up 8%. We did see, like you mentioned, cars are coming down a little bit, but they had been up like 40, 50%. Yeah. So new vehicles up 12%, used vehicles 16%. That has moderated a little bit, thank goodness. And part of that was because of the pandemic back up, because they had closed some of the assembly lines. But it seems like the only thing that gets us out of this, unfortunately, is raising interest rates. And now they're talking about next Wednesday, it could be 75 basis points, 3/4 of a percentage point, rather than 50.
I think that obviously you're going to have to raise rates and they're going to have to run off part of the balance sheet. But it's not just that. Quite honestly, if Joe Biden came out and said, listen, okay, we want to get to electric cars, but we're not going to realistically get there for another 2.5 to 3 decades. So we're going to change our energy policy, and we're going to open up the Keystone Pipeline. We're going to drill in ANWR, and we're going to meet with the oil companies and do what we can to amp up production. It's a futures market. So eventually the traders would start saying, okay, the United States is going to go back the way it was, and the prices would drop.
Yes, they would. And that almost sounds like a campaign speech there, Chris. I don't know if you're running, but that is exactly what people need to hear. The oil companies need to hear, because they have to believe that the billions of dollars they invest in taking the oil out of the ground, finding it first, taking it out, sending it somewhere to refine it, and then getting it to the gas stations, that's a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar project.
When the Fed talks about what they're going to do, they call it forward guidance. The president can do the same thing, too. Yeah. You go back, there was a great editorial today in the Wall Street Journal talking about when COVID went down and oil prices were extraordinarily volatile and they went down. OPEC invited us to be a member of OPEC because of how powerful we were and what we could do. We obviously didn't do that. But, to think about where we were then and where we are now, it's a complete 180-degree turn, and it hasn't benefited the American consumer at all.
No, it doesn't. But I like your campaign speech. Let me know where you're running. Send me a mail-in ballot, and I'll send. I don't want to get into that conversation. But Chris Markowski, thank you so much for joining us.
Have a great weekend.
All right.